Hi, I'm Fareed Haque. I started teaching guitar and jazz at Northern in 1988, and I was 20-some years old. So it was a new experience for me to be teaching at all, and it was a very exciting time because I was at that point, in the beginning stages of my career performing and touring jazz and classical music, and suddenly to be thrust into a position where I was teaching and interacting with some of the great faculty that are here. It was a very exciting time. I guess I've been here now about 25, 26 years. After getting married and the kids came along, I just wanted to be, obviously close to work, and there's a great community here. It's a fantastic experience to be in a town that is so appreciative of the arts. I think that's the best way to say it. Having the surprise of my life was moving here and then finding a great NPR station and a 24-hour classical music station was just kind of a huge welcome for me. In Chicago, which is also a great radio town, we lost 24-hour jazz, and sort of come to this little community comparatively, and find so much great music and so much great radio and great culture was really important to me and kept me connected in a lot of ways. So first thing I do in the morning is turn on the radio and see what's happening, and I come right to WNIU and WNIJ and check in. I'm always amazed at the music scene here and how the radio interfaces with that. How many of my students have come back with, man, I heard the coolest thing on the radio yesterday. And even my kids heard Scheherazade for the first time, and they spent the entire 55 minutes of that piece dancing and playing nights, and they said, Daddy, when are we going to hear that night music again? So it's a fantastic resource to be able to just click a dial and be connected. It's in many ways the go-to resource, obviously, not only for news information, that's super important, but for what's trending, what's hip in music, So listening to the World Cafe, listening to, I've been on Marco Werman's show a few times, but go back to his show to see what's happening in the world, and he'll always have a segment on the arts and music as well. So many of those shows, highlight what's happening. Terry Gross, of course, is always right up to the minute of what's happening. So I feel like it's a great way to keep current in the arts, and an essential tool. Anywhere in the country I go, I can find that dial and be dialed in, so to speak. Having a 24-hour classical station is a blessing, because I don't really, this may sound odd, but I don't really listen to music very much. When I do listen to music, I want to listen to music. And that's usually these days in the car when I have no kids screaming and no computer to have to wrestle with and no emails to send, And I'm one of those people who really listen to music. It's hard for me to have music on in the background, and so to be able to get in the car and put on the classical station and listen to music and always be surprised by what's happening. I think the NIU classical stations, the DJs do a great job of presenting the music, and there's always something educational even for me, and that's really, really fun. So I can't tell you how many times I'm listening to something and I'm writing it down and waiting to get home to look up on the playlist. What did I just hear? Who was that new guitar player I just heard that I haven't heard of before? It's important because it isn't a given. It's not something you can just assume is always going to be there. That tends to be, particularly in an affluent society like ours, you say, oh, well, it's all there and someone else is going to take care of it. If we value this resource, we have to support it. It's not just a line that this is public supported radio, you know. It really needs that contribution, and it's something that isn't managed and filtered through any corporate structure, right? And I think that's super important, that we keep something that we can at least have an input on every level. It's not just letters to the editor, but say, hey, you know, our funding means something. It's our voice. So, you know, in a democracy, we want to be involved in the media that's out there and available to us. And I think supporting public radio is a fantastic way to do that. My mother is from Chile, and being a Hispanic country, the guitar has always been hugely influential in her life. I went to Spain as a young boy a few times, and you know, heard real flamenco. My mom managed to get us into all these, you know, little flamenco societies and hear the real deal with Spanish guitar. And of course, you know, my dad is from Pakistan, and I grew up in America, so I was culturally very spread out, if you will, and not the least confused. And the guitar was a bridge for me. It was a way of saying, oh, I can see how this culture relates to the guitar, and wow, there's the sitar in India and how that relates to the guitar, and then of course blues and jazz and rock and roll in America, and how that is so intimately involved with the guitar. So the guitar has always been a bridge for me to bring all these diverse cultural influences together.
So who are you inspired by? You mentioned Spain. You automatically you might think Andres Segovia, but are there other influential artists out there that you think were really made up your mind to master this instrument? Well,
certainly Segovia was one. I met him a few times in Spain, very briefly. I mean, I was a young guy, but his presence was huge, and you couldn't help but be affected by his contribution, but also his personality. He was a very magnanimous and cultured gentleman, and he really, when he walked in the room, you felt the 19th century walk in the room with him. And he was judging a competition, and I was just beginning to play the guitar, and I was watching him, and I had heard him in Chicago at Symphony Center. It was called Orchestra Hall back then. And I went up to him, and of course in Spanish, you know, you have to say usted, the formal, when you're talking to someone who's an elder, who's respected. I was a little too young to know, and my Spanish was at that time was very sketchy. And so I said, you know, will you, with the informal too, will you be coming to Chicago again next year? I couldn't think of anything to say. I was like, you know, I think I was 9 years old or something, you know. And he looked at me for a second, and then he smiled, and he patted me on the head. And he said, of course, I'll be in Chicago again next year, and I hope you come and see me. And that little pat on the head was something I still remember, because it was very kind and very generous and very warm. I like to describe what I am as an improvising classical guitarist. That is to say, most of what I do guitaristically comes from or is drawn from classical influences. And yet I play a lot of modern music, a lot of jazz, a lot of funk, a lot of African music. And all of my approach to those different styles draws on classical influence. So whereas many jazz guitarists will approach chords a certain way and playing melodies a certain way, I will always approach them with a classical guitarist perspective. A classical guitarist looks at the guitar as a little orchestra. So you have a bass line, middle voices, and a melody line. A blues guitarist is pretty much, you know, playing the melody or playing the chords. And that sort of orchestral approach to the guitar is what classical guitarists bring to the instrument. And I've tried in my ways to take that into jazz guitar, into funk guitar, into rock guitar. For example, let's say I was just playing for a student something like a standard like Tenderly, you know. A jazz guitarist might play classical guitarist wouldn't really even play this piece, because unless they had it written down in notes, you know. But the concept, as a jazz guitarist who plays a lot of classical music, allows me to think about this song in a different way. So I might play. So a lot of the little devices there, you know, you're using, it's a kind of a classical device. Arpeggios, you know, I might play. You know, using different techniques like that really open up the palette, and especially doing these kind of techniques on an electric guitar. That's where the bridge is. You know, there's a lot of people who play acoustic guitar, play classical guitar, but the moment you cross into the electric guitar world, you're entering a whole new dimension. And so sometimes, last week I walked up on stage and jammed with Larry Keel, the fingerstyle champion, flat picking champion a few years ago in the bluegrass world. And I've played with a lot of musicians who were staying for a while, musicians who were more associated with rock music and pop music. And I also played for a year with a very respected keyboard player named Joe Zawinul, who started the group Weather Report, who played with Miles Davis, with Cannonball Adderley. And his groups that I worked with him in were very influenced by African music. So he had all this technology, all this technique, all this experience. And then he said, you know, but let's go back to the roots and figure out how the folklorical elements of the music. He would tell me, you know, here's the part you have to play. And it might be something as simple as and I wanted to play that for 20, 25 minutes. It was awesome. And his thing was, you know, here's your part. Never ever change your part, but never play it the same way twice.